The first-class cabin was quiet, eerily so. Polished surfaces gleamed under warm ambient lights, and the gentle hum of the aircraft blended with the occasional rustle of newspapers or the clink of ice in a crystal glass. It was the kind of silence that wealth demanded. Discreet, controlled, superior. Seated in 3A was a woman in a simple black blazer, no jewelry aside from a thin platinum band and an ivory-colored watch. Her hair was pulled into a soft twist, and a pair of wire-frame glasses rested on her face. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't loud. She looked efficient, the kind of person you'd overlook at a private airport lounge unless you knew who she was. Harper Chase leaned slightly forward, calm and composed, and raised a quiet hand. "Excuse me," she said gently to the passing flight attendant. "Could I please have still water with lemon, no ice?" Caroline Linton, the lead flight attendant for this route, known among peers for her flawless handling of high-tier clientele, stopped mid-stride. She turned slowly, gave Harper a once-over that barely hid her contempt, and narrowed her eyes. "Still water? No ice? Lemon?" Caroline's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Ma'am," she said, voice low but firm, "this section is reserved for first-class passengers. We'll be serving shortly." Harper's brow lifted ever so slightly. She held up her boarding pass, neatly folded, already scanned and seated. "I am in first class," she replied calmly. Carolyn didn't even glance at the pass. Her posture stiffened as her voice took on that familiar edge, sweet for show, sharp underneath. "Yes," she said slowly, drawing out the word like a blade. "But some upgrades come with limits. Complimentary seating doesn't include concierge-level requests." The air shifted. A middle-aged man across the aisle paused, his spoon halfway to his mouth. A woman 3 rows back leaned just enough to hear. The soft murmur of the cabin dimmed, the tension crackling like static. Harper didn't flinch. "This is not an upgrade. My ticket was purchased. Full fare." Caroline snorted. Actually snorted. Then, as if she'd heard some invisible cue, she stepped forward abruptly, towering over Harper's seat. "Listen," she hissed, her tone now fully detached from any service script. "I don't know how you got up here or what favors you pulled, but people like you..." And that was when it happened. A sudden blur of motion, a sharp smack. Caroline's open palm had come down, not across Harper's face, no, not quite, but hard across her wrist as she lifted her boarding pass again. It knocked the slip from her hand and sent it skidding across the aisle, fluttering to a stop beneath another seat. Gasps. The sound echoed in the cabin like a slap of thunder, louder than it should have been, louder than anyone wanted it to be. "Are you kidding me?" someone whispered. A young man in business attire sat up straighter. A woman in a navy pantsuit covered her mouth. A flight attendant further back froze, eyes wide, tray in hand. But Harper didn't yell, didn't scream. She didn't even look surprised. She blinked once, then turned to look Caroline full in the face. Her expression was unreadable, neutral, not humiliated, not angry, just steady. She calmly reached down, retrieved her handbag, and pulled out her phone. No shaking fingers, no flustered sighs. Caroline, still standing there, seemed to realize too late that she had gone too far. Her face began to pale, just a little. "I asked you to stay quiet," Caroline snapped, her voice cracking slightly. Harper didn't even look at her. Her thumb hovered over her phone. One tap. Face ID unlocked. A second tap. Then she held the phone to her ear and spoke only 2 words. "Execute it." And then she hung up. Silence fell again, but this time it was heavier. Caroline blinked. "Excuse me? What was that?" she asked, her voice louder now, laced with a false laugh, as if trying to shrug off the moment. Harper turned her head, just slightly. Her voice was calm, steady, deliberate. "You'll understand when we land." Then she turned away, folded her hands gently in her lap, and looked out the window. And just like that, the balance of power in the cabin had shifted. No yelling, no threats, no raised voices. Just a single call and an unsettling stillness that told everyone on board something was coming. The cabin remained motionless as Harper Chase lowered her phone and tucked it back into her sleek leather clutch. For a moment, it felt like the world had paused. Overhead bins hummed with the soft click of air pressure equalizing, but no one moved. Not a single whisper broke the stillness after Harper's curt words. "You'll understand." Row upon row of first-class seats sat empty of conversation. A champagne flute, half cig-matted and sweating from condensation, trembled in a passenger's hand before settling back onto its tray table. Somewhere near the mid-cabin service hatch, a cartwheel squeaked, then froze. A flight attendant halfway through refilling a water glass paused, her body half-turned, eyes wide as she stared at Harper. Even the hum of the engines seemed muted, as if the jet itself were holding its breath. Caroline Linton's jaw clenched. She forced her shoulders to steady themselves, took a half step back from Harper's seat, and pressed her palms flat against her uniform, an unconscious attempt to appear composed. The stiff navy fabric felt like armor, yet she looked anything but invincible. Her name badge? Caroline Linton, lead flight attendant, caught the light in a way that seemed to mock her. The crew had rehearsed their smiles and polished their silverware, but no training covered the bizarre aftermath of an executive's silent command. Passengers exchanged glances. A man by the window leaned over to his neighbor and mouthed, "Did you see that?" His neighbor only blinked, eyes darting between Harper and Caroline, uncertain whether to laugh, gasp, or excuse themselves from this uncomfortable theater. Snapshots of the moment had already been captured on smartphones, hands hovering in midair, stunned faces illuminated by phone screens. Low beeps in the overhead bins signaled that cameras were pressing record, not for a marketing video but for their personal feeds. In the back of the cabin, Leah Bennett, Caroline's second in command, hovered behind an empty cart, her hands gripping the handles so hard her knuckles whitened. Leah had walked this line between service and empathy countless times, offering a friendly word here, an apologetic nod there. But Leah's demeanor betrayed her. She was torn between loyalty to the airline's chain of command and her own instinct to protect a fellow woman under attack. She glanced toward Harper's seat, then at Caroline, and swallowed. Whoever Harper Chase was, she clearly held cards that none of them could see. A gentle cough echoed down the aisle as one of the passengers finally broke the silence. "Is everything okay back here?" the woman asked in a polite, almost practiced voice, as if this were a routine in-flight announcement. She was mid-50s, dressed in a pastel blouse with a silk scarf, the epitome of middle-aged elegance. Her question hung in the air long after she spoke. Caroline opened her mouth to answer but closed it again. How could she explain? That her authority had just been stripped away with a single phone call? That the woman she'd slapped held the fate of not only Caroline, but the entire crew in her hand? Instead, Caroline cleared her throat. "Yes, ma'am," she said, her voice tight. "Just a minor misunderstanding. We'll be serving your lunch shortly." She turned on a smile, her practiced, corporate smile, and gestured toward an imaginary tray. The passenger nodded slowly, her gaze flicking back to Harper behind Caroline's shoulder. There was no ridiculing smirk, no visible fear, just curiosity, the kind that grows when people realize they're witnessing something extraordinary. Meanwhile, Harper settled back into her seat with the same unruffled poise she'd exhibited before. She adjusted her glasses, reached for a reading light, and unfolded a financial report, the quarterly earnings for Clarion Holdings. It was almost absurdly serene. The contrast between the chaos she'd just orchestrated and her unbothered demeanor was jarring. In Harper's world, silence was a weapon, and she wielded it expertly. Ive rose forward. Sebastian Drake, the sharply dressed businessman who had earlier offered his seat to Harper, watched the scene unfold through narrowed eyes. He wasn't easily impressed. He'd seen countless power plays in boardrooms and at investor conferences, but this was a performance worthy of headlines. He tapped a quick message into his phone. Ground crew on this flight just lost their jobs because she didn't like being slapped. He hit send and tucked his device away, mind racing to process how the intricate web of corporate power could reach all the way to 30,000 feet. A hush settled once more as the silence stretched into something almost reverent. The cabin had become a theater, and Harper its unspoken director. Every passenger, every crew member was an unwilling actor in a drama that defied convention. There was no applause, no confrontation. Only the weight of what had happened and the unspoken question, what next? Caroline moved away from Harper's seat, each step measured. She retreated to the galley, where the lights were brighter, more utilitarian. Here, other crew members waited, eyes flicking between Caroline and the closed curtain that hid the first-class cabin from view. Caroline swallowed hard, then spoke in a low voice. "Stand by for instructions. The company will contact us directly." Leah hovered at Caroline's side. "Do you think she'll call again?" Leah whispered. Caroline didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew that no further words would come. Harper's first call had been enough. The rest would unfold on the ground. Back in her seat, Harper flipped to the next page of her report, pen poised. She made a single note. Serif strokes, neat and deliberate, then leaned back and closed her eyes for a brief moment. No sigh of triumph, no hint of victory, just the calm of a woman who understood the true cost of power and how to enforce it without a raised voice. And somewhere in the hushed cabin, a single thought echoed. This woman is not someone to cross. The engines droned on, as if reluctantly resuming their normal hum. But for everyone on Flight 7, X-143, things would never sound the same again. Harper Chase sat with perfect poise as the plane cruised toward its destination. The steady thrum of the engines tickled her ears, but her mind was elsewhere. In the boardroom at Clarion Holdings, where her fingerprints were figuratively and sometimes literally on every contract that flowed through the company's sleek glass doors. To look at her now, calm and composed in that unassuming black blazer, no one aboard would guess she was the driving force behind a financial empire with tentacles wrapped around the aviation industry itself. A few hours earlier, at 7:45 a.m., Harper had slipped into her home office in Greenwich, Connecticut. The sun was just peeking over the Housatonic River, painting the walls in soft gold. Framed on the mantel behind her desk were two accolades. One, a crystal plaque recognizing her as Forbes's top 5 women who control aviation without owning an airline, and the other, a more discreet award from the Global Underwriters Association for Lifetime Achievement in Risk Management. They were reminders, not of vanity, but of responsibility, because in Harper's world, quiet influence carried far more weight than flashy headlines. Her morning routine was ritual: a single cup of black coffee, no sugar, consumed in 3 sips, a cursory perusal of headlines, mostly financial news, rarely personal profiles, and then straight to work. By 8:30, She was in a video conference, her face squared in the center of a dozen smaller screens, leading a discussion on a potential $750 million 0-cents reinsurance package for Skyreach Airlines. That meeting had set the stage for everything that followed on Flight 7X143. She'd presented projections showing that a catastrophic failure, anything from a mechanical collapse to a high-profile PR disaster, could cost the airline upwards of $1 billion, 0 cents, in liabilities. Clarion Holdings had underwritten half that risk. And that morning, as she spoke in her calm, even tone, the transportation minister of a small European country listened intently, interjecting only to ask clarifications. "So, Ms. Chase," he'd said, "if there were insurmountable losses deemed, avoidable, you could revoke coverage?" Her answer had been precise. "Yes. We reserve the right to suspend coverage if policy terms are breached. No hesitation, no alarm, just fact." By 10:15, the video call had ended. An assistant delivered a slim folder to her desk. "Skyreach Flight Manifest," it read, inside a list of names, including hers. They flew her out for a private summit in New York, and the ticket had cost more than some people's annual salaries. Harper didn't flinch at the price. She'd paid it herself. Because this flight, like every risk she underwrote, was accounted for down to the last decimal. To her, purchasing a $25,000 0-cent first-class seat was simply another line item on her spreadsheet. As she packed her carry-on, a soft knock at the door heralded her driver's arrival. She paused, pressed a finger to her lips, then applied a single stroke of clear lip balm. Her reflection in the hallway mirror showed a woman who wore calm like a cloak. No lipstick, no scarves. She didn't need theatrics. Her reputation preceded her. Now, seated in 1A, she reflected on the day's events. She was an expert at reading risk, pricing it, trading it, neutralizing it, and she was equally adept at reading people. Before boarding, she'd overheard whispers. "Who's that woman in 1A, the one on her phone? She's with Clarion, isn't she?" But Harper never invited scrutiny. Her power came from invisibility. People saw her as just another passenger, if they saw her at all. Her gaze drifted across the aisle to Caroline Linton. Caroline stood rigidly at the galley, checking her reflection in a spoon, shoulders square. That same Caroline had just cost herself everything with one impulsive slap. Harper acknowledged the irony. A flight attendant who believed she held authority over the hapless passengers, only to learn that authority was rented, not owned. A hush fell over the cabin as Harper's phone chimed softly. A text notification from her CIO. Carrier's claims team alerted. Policy on suspension protocol activated. She didn't need to look. She already knew. The moment her silent directive reached Clarion's systems, automated triggers began rolling out standard breach procedures. Within seconds, Skyreach's coverage was in limbo. Yet Harper remained unreadable. She closed her eyes briefly, picturing the spreadsheet that mapped every flight, every risk zone, every crew roster. That sheet was her battlefield map. She saw Caroline's name there, in neat type, alongside every pilot and co-pilot. Now, that row would be marked terminated. It was data. It was business. The passenger seated next to her reached for a snack from the service cart and paused, eyes flicking to Harper. He hesitated, then slid the bag back and coughed politely. Nerves twitched like static. Harper opened her eyes. A slow, half-smile touched her lips, more a ghost of a smile than anything else, and she met his gaze for a fraction of a second. She didn't have to say anything. The look communicated everything. Don't underestimate what you can't see. In these moments, Harper felt the familiar surge of control. It wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't cruelty. It was a reaffirmation of balance. Disrespect had consequences. and when those consequences were carefully calibrated, they landed without drama, except for a single slap to start the chain reaction. She glanced at her watch. A white gold Cartier, simple but unmistakable. Exactly 11:02 AE, a Greenwich time. 20 minutes until descent began. 2 hours ago, life had been business as usual. Now the stakes were personal for the crew. And when they knew what had happened, when the headlines flashed "Sky Reach grounded" across screens in every trading room from Chicago to Tokyo, they would grasp the unspoken lesson. You don't slap someone whose authority you can't quantify. Harper sat back and flexed her fingers, smoothing the air as though stroking a sheet of silk. The cabin resumed its rhythms. Whispers here, the clink of a fork there, but it was all under her influence. Like a conductor fading into the background once the orchestra is playing, Harper remained composed. Because in her world, the most powerful moves were the ones you scarcely heard, and the ones that left the greatest impact. Soon, the captain would announce descent. Soon, the crew would discover their fate. And when the plane's wheels touched ground, Caroline Linton and every crew member on 7X-143 would learn Harper Chase wasn't to be mistaken for just another passenger. They would learn why respect wasn't optional, and why risk, once activated, could never be undone. Harper Chase watched the cabin lights glide overhead as they dimmed for a mid-flight meal service. The flight attendants emerged from the galley, trays in hand, moving with their usual choreographed precision. Caroline Linton led the way, her back ramrod straight, each step measured. Still unaware that the very authority she wielded so freely had just been wrested from her grasp. Harper leaned back into her plush seat, secured her seatbelt and reached into her leather clutch. Her fingers closed around a sleek Matt Drex smartphone. Nothing flashy, just efficient. She tapped the side button once, then twice, her thumb finding a subtle ridge on the case. An app icon glowed on the screen. ClearDeck Protocol. It was locked behind multi-factor authentication, face recognition, a 6-digit code, then a biometric swipe. No casual user could stumble upon it. Only Harper and 2 other members of Clarion Holdings' executive board possessed the credentials. She paused, staring at the icon for a heartbeat longer than necessary, like a surgeon checking her instruments before making the first incision. Then, with a single press, she activated it. There was no fanfare, no "Are you sure?" prompt. The command went out instantly. Back in the bowels of Sky Reach Airlines Control Center, hundreds of miles below, screens flickered with the protocol notification. Clarion Holdings, executive clear, deck initiated, level 3. Flight 7X-1433. Immediate crew suspension. Within moments, a terse message zipped through the secured network. Suspend all crew actions. Crew manifest, terminate service upon landing. Controllers exchanged glances, fingers hovering over keyboards. It was not their place to question a protocol stamped with the Harper Chase seal. They hit, acknowledged, and forwarded the dispatch to in-flight operations, tagging Caroline's tablet in the cockpit's secure channel. Meanwhile, Harper set her phone aside and folded her hands neatly in her lap, as if she'd simply ordered a glass of still water. Her expression remained impassive, betraying no hint of triumph or vindication. This was not about spectacle. It was business, executed with absolute precision. Down the aisle, Caroline noticed her tablet buzz. She glanced at its screen, a single line of text in red. Pronoun clear, deck level 3. Crew service suspended up upon landing. She blinked, her practiced calm slipping. She tapped the notification, expecting a follow-up or an explanation. Nothing, just the terse instruction. She looked to the galley, to the team. Leah Bennett furrowed her brows, glance flicking from Caroline's screen to the cabin door. "Caroline?" Leah whispered. voice trembling as though she feared disturbing a sleeping lion. "What does that mean?" Caroline exhaled, stiffening her shoulders. I don't know," she lied, her voice tighter than she intended. "It must be a system error. Keep serving, and I'll check with ops." But Harper's presence loomed. The cabin felt suddenly smaller, as if the invisible thread Harper had pulled far above now snaked through the floorboards, entwining around every pair of feet in first class. Caroline caught Harper's eye, an imperceptible flicker of interest in those cool, gray irises. Harper looked back with calm curiosity, head tilted barely an inch. Caroline swallowed, forced herself to nod, and turned to resume service. But the tray in her hand trembled. Leia moved closer to steady it, worried. The other attendants followed Caroline's lead, plating dishes, refilling glasses. Yet each motion felt brittle, as though the smallest slip would shatter the routine irreparably. At 30,000 feet, the aircraft's wheels were still miles from pavement, yet a storm of dread had already broken. 2 rows ahead, a man in a charcoal suit tapped nervously on his phone, scrolling through live news updates. Seconds ago, the major aviation wires had caught the protocol breach. Skyreach Airlines crew suspended mid-flight by Clarion Holdings' clear deck authority. He leaned forward, his voice low but urgent to his neighbor. "Did you see that? They've been suspended, mid-air." The neighbor's eyes widened. That can't be legal, can it?" Back by Harper's seat, a flight attendant's hand hovered near the call button. Caroline shot her a glance, sharp, warning, then took a deep breath. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second and steadied her voice. "Folks, I apologize for any confusion. Please, enjoy your meal. We'll have a further announcement shortly." In the cockpit, Captain Jonathan Reynolds frowned at the alert flashing on his console. "Crew suspension, level 3. He tapped his headset mic. "Ops Center, this is Flight 7V143. We've received an order to suspend crew operations upon landing. Can you verify?" The reply crackled through. "Affirmative, Captain. Direct order from Clarion Holdings. All crew suspended effective touchdown. Further instructions to follow on ground." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He exchanged a look with First Officer Martinez, a silent question in their eyes. They knew that once they touched down, their cabin crew would be forced off before passengers. It was unprecedented. It was harsh. And it would sow chaos. Harper watched all of this unfold in serene silence, as if she were reading a novel rather than orchestrating the downfall of a crew mid-flight. She reached for her water glass, lifted it to her lips, and sipped, eyes never leaving Caroline, who by now had retreated to the galley, trying furiously to look composed while her heart pounded. Leah crept after Caroline and whispered, "What do we do?" Caroline looked at her, guilt and fear warring on her face. "We wait," she mouthed back. "We have no choice." And so the cabin continued its forced calm, passengers eating in uneasy silence, attendants serving with masks of professionalism, the cockpit operating under the cold glow of emergency protocol. All because of a single, silent command, delivered from one woman's fingertips. 3 hours earlier, the cabin had been alive with small talk and clinking silverware. Now it felt like the calm before a verdict, a palpable hush pregnant with anticipation. Every passenger knew, deep down, that their safe return to the ground carried an extra weight. They were witnesses to a power greater than any uniform, any title, any airline policy. Harper leaned forward slightly, tapped her glass table twice, and whispered to herself, just loud enough for Caroline to hear, if she dared to glance back. "Consider this your final boarding call." The words were calm, the threat was clear. And in that minute, Before anyone could respond, the flight resumed its journey, bearing down toward touchdown, and toward the moment when authority, once activated in silence, would demand its reckoning. Deep beneath the runway lights and ticket counters, Skyreach Airlines' operations center hummed with low, constant energy. Dozens of staff sat at curved desks, each backlit by multiple monitors displaying flight paths, weather radar, and crew manifests. It was a place built for calm precision, an underground nerve center making sure hundreds of flights took off and landed without a hitch. At precisely 11:15 a.m. Greenwich time, an alert blinked at the top corner of every screen. Red text scrolled across the main display. Clarion Holdings, Clear Deck Protocol 771. Initiated emergency crew dismissal for flight 7X113. For a heartbeat, the room froze. Then controllers sprang to life. "Did you see that?" whispered a junior dispatcher, eyes wide behind thick framed glasses. He tapped his headset mic. "Control to all stations. Confirm protocol receipt." A dozen voices murmured in quick affirmation. Ever since Clarion Holdings had acquired Skyreach 2 years ago, they'd integrated a clear deck kill swip into the system, an executive override that no airline manager could ignore. It was supposed to be used only in extreme circumstances, terrorism threats, catastrophic mechanical failures, or the rare case of an entire crew acting outside company policy. But cabin etiquette had never qualified. Until now. Operations Manager Dana Whitman, a steely-eyed veteran with 20 years under her belt, pivoted around her desk. Her silver bob caught the fluorescent glare as she addressed the room. "All right, people, this is not a drill. Clarion Seal 3 means immediate action. No appeals. Document everything and prepare to post the crew's suspension order." She tapped a series of keys. On her primary monitor, a secure audio file popped up, time-stamped 11:02 IEMM. Audio transcript. Executed. No appeals. Document behavior. Execute full removal. Speaker. Harper Chase, CEO and Chair, Clarion Holdings. An intern dispatcher paled. "That sounded like her voice," he whispered. "That's definitely Ms. Chase." Dana nodded curtly. "That's because it was. Now let's move." She clicked Aganold on the protocol banner. Instantly, the secure order zipped to the in-flight operations team, those who managed active flights in real time. It tagged both the cockpit data link on Flight 7X1433 and the dedicated tablet carried by Caroline Linton in first class. On the wall, a large LED board updated. Flight 7X143, crew suspension order transmitted. In the hush that followed, Dana laid out the steps. First, log the incident in the breach register. Second, dispatch a ground operations alert to have local security meet crew upon arrival. Third, coordinate with passenger services to handle any fallout. Her tone was crisp, business as usual, but her eyes flicked to the log icon, where another click would imprint the order in company history. A second operations manager, Jerome Steele, leaned in. His tie was loosened, his badge read, Deputy Ops. "Dana, do we have confirmation they've received the order in flight?" Dana toggled through secure comms channels. "Cockpit confirmed. Caroline's tablet hasn't pinged back, but that's expected. She won't respond. She's got one job. Serve until they land." Jerome pressed his lips together. "Orders say immediate crew dismissal upon landing. Do we need to notify HR?" "Already done," Dana replied. "I just emailed the HR lead, Gail Moran. They'll be ready with manuals, final pay packets, everything. Corporate security is on standby in both London and New York." Jerome exhaled. "This is going to be huge." Dana's jaw tightened. "I know. We're about to set a precedent." But it came straight from Clarion's top. We execute, no questions. In one corner of the room, a senior flight planner tapped at a map, drawing a bright yellow line along Flight 7X143's path. He circled the destination airport. Underneath, a post-it read, "Meet crew, gate B12, 1430 local." Across the aisle, an analyst pulled up the crew manifest. Photos of Caroline Linton flashed by, followed by images of co-pilots and cabin staff. Each name was highlighted, then marked with a red dot. Dana watched over his shoulder. "Take a screenshot and send to press office," she instructed. "They should pre-draft a holding statement. Due to executive security protocols, Skyreach operating crew for Flight 7X143 will be replaced upon landing. Passengers will be updated accordingly." In the far back, a young woman, new to the team, raised her hand. "Dana, pardon me. Should we alert the passenger services team? They'll get avalanche of calls." Dana gave her a sharp look. "Yes. Let them know to handle VIP complaints first. This'll hit social media in seconds." Within moments, multiple departments were in motion. Legal gathering the protocol clauses, PR drafting cautious language, ground ops sending instructions to airport staff, finance preparing final payroll, and compliance logging the event for future audits. All the while, the central protocol screen glowed ominously. Clarion Holdings, Authority Level 3. No appeal. Dana allowed herself a single breath. "Let's stay on top of this," she said. "Any deviation and we look like we didn't follow orders. I want every email CC'd. Understood?" "Understood," echoed the room. She looked back at the red-flagged manifest on the flight planner's screen. "Remind me to drop a note to Harper after landing. Thank her for the smooth execution." The planner's fingers stilled. "Yes, ma'am." Moments later, as controllers resumed tracking the jet's path, the pulse of the operations center picked back up. Data fed through every console: altitude, speed, estimated time to landing. But beneath the routine metrics, there was an undercurrent of tension. Something extraordinary had happened at 30,000 feet. A single, silent directive from one powerful woman had rippled through this entire room. And when Flight 7X143 finally touched down, this center, beneath its flickering screens and hushed voices, would be the launch pad for an unprecedented wave of consequences. Because in corporate aviation, just as in life, the true price of power was paid in full, without discounts or appeals. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical whir, and Flight 7X143 began its descent into JFK. Passengers straightened in their seats, fastening seatbelts as the cabin lights brightened again for taxi. A hush fell over first class. No one spoke, as the aircraft touched down with a gentle thud. Wheels kissed the runway, and the plane rolled forward, decelerating under the soft glow of taxiway lights. In the cockpit, Captain Jonathan Reynolds announced over the intercom in his usual calm baritone, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the captain turns off the seatbelt sign." His voice betrayed none of what was unfolding behind him. Moments later, a stifled chime sounded in the galley. Caroline Linton, still clutching a service tray she'd been carrying, froze. Her heart pounded so loudly she wondered if every passenger could hear it. She set the tray down on the nearest countertop, silverware tinkling against china, and squared her shoulders. A single line of bold red text appeared on her tablet. "Crew suspension order. Flight 7X1433. Effective immediately upon landing. All crew must remain in position." Her breath caught. She swallowed, pressing a trembling finger to acknowledge the message. Around her, the other flight attendants exchanged nervous glances. Leah Bennett looked at Caroline, eyes wide. There was no whisper of protest, No frantic scramble to hide the shock, only a collective, frozen understanding that something extraordinary was happening. Caroline stepped out of the galley, crossing the threshold into first class as the seatbelt sign blinked off. She cleared her throat, her voice oddly small. "Ladies and gentlemen, your flight crew has been instructed to remain on board for further instructions. We appreciate your patience." The practiced poise she usually wore like armor felt brittle now. A murmur rippled through the cabin like a breeze brushing across still water. A gentleman in row 2, smartly dressed, salt and pepper hair, leaned forward. "Excuse me," he asked tentatively. "Did you say our crew can't leave the plane?" Caroline forced a nod. "That's correct. We've received special orders from operations." She met his gaze, trying to project calm assurance. Inside, her mind raced. Why? What could possibly justify this? But she dared not ask aloud. A hush settled again, heavier this time, as realization dawned. The young flight attendant who'd been refilling water glasses let her arm drop to her side. Her uniform felt suddenly foreign. The co-pilot opened the cockpit door, his face pale. Behind him, Captain Reynolds and First Officer Martinez stood as if poised for a court-martial, their professional calm cracking at the edges. At the forward service door, the cabin crew's usual path to freedom, the stairs, the walkway to arrivals, was blocked by a pair of uniformed ground handlers standing ominously at the jet bridge entrance. Both held clipboards and wore expressions that mixed duty with something colder. They glanced up, saw Caroline exiting, and straightened. Their presence was the first tangible proof that the suspension order would be enforced, not negotiated. Caroline's legs felt heavy, as though gravity had doubled. She clenched and unclenched her fists at her sides, trying to steady herself. Leah hovered behind her, whispering, "What do we do?" Caroline inhaled, exhaled. "Just stay here," she said quietly, her voice firm despite the tremor. Overhead, passengers watched in stunned silence. A woman in a floral dress pressed her palms together as if in prayer. A businessman fumbled with his phone, recording the moment. A young mother held her toddler close. The scene played out like a slow-motion tableau. Crew immobilized, passengers uncertain, gates open, but no one moving. Then, from somewhere deep in the cabin, a single pair of hands broke the tension. A middle-aged man in a tailored suit, a fellow executive perhaps, slapped one palm against the other. It was hesitant at first, then more confident, as if he were applauding a performance he couldn't believe. He rose to his feet and clapped, drawing a ripple of hesitant applause around him. A few others joined in, some smiling in a shock-induced euphoria. It was the first sign of solidarity with Harper's invisible conviction. Caroline felt that applause like a physical blow. She pressed her lips together, unwilling to meet their eyes. The clapping ceased as quickly as it had begun, replaced by nervous laughter and quiet chatter. "I've never seen anything like this. Who made that call? Why are they still on the plane?" Passengers peered at the handlers, peered at the cockpit, then peered at each other, searching for understanding. Down the aisle, Harper Chase took note of it all from her forward seat. She watched the spark of recognition in passengers' faces, the moment when they realize that respect and power often travel unseen until someone chooses to enforce them. She had triggered every domino, from her private phone call to the suspended crew to this surreal moment of public catharsis. And she remained seated, hands folded, exuding serene authority. Captain Reynolds returned to the cockpit, closing the door with a muted click. Caroline watched that door, then looked at the handlers. They didn't move. Their clipboards were locked, their instructions final. The ground team would escort the crew off the plane before passengers disembarked. It was an unprecedented, uncompromising directive. Caroline's gaze shifted to Leah. Leah's eyes were moist, and Caroline could see the quiet question forming at the corners of her mouth. "Please," Caroline mouthed, "go sit down." Leah nodded and slipped into the galley, head bowed. Now alone, Caroline took one last look around the cabin. Pillows fluffed on seats, silverware polished on trays, champagne untouched, all markers of luxury now overshadowed by the weight of discipline. She gripped the tablet to her chest, the screen's red letters blazing like a warning light. A final announcement crackled from the cockpit. "Ladies and gentlemen, ground operations has informed us we will disembark via alternate gateways. Please remain seated until further notice." The voice was calm. The message was anything but. The engines shut off, and the hum of electricity resumed. Doors would open soon, but no one moved. Passengers exchanged glances, some nodding in reluctant respect, others simply staring at the crew members who had once served them so graciously. For the first time in their travel lives, they were on the same side. Witnesses to a reckoning without spectacle, a punishment without drama. Outside the cabin windows, the terminal's lights beckoned. Caroline felt the full weight of her actions knock the breath from her lungs. She realized, in that suspended stillness, that her uniform offered no protection against the silence of lost authority, and that the moment she and her colleagues stepped off that plane, they would all be steeped in the legacy of a single, silent decision. And for everyone on Flight 7X-143, the world would never look at a boarding pass the same way again. The jet bridge rattled against the cabin door as Skyreach Flight 7X-143 came to a gentle stop. The seatbelt sign blinked off, but no one moved. Passengers stared at the galley door, waiting for the crew to emerge for some explanation. Instead, Caroline Linton stepped into the aisle alone, her uniform crisp, but her shoulders slumped, eyes darting toward seat 1A, where Harper Chase sat, as still as a statue. Caroline cleared her throat, a tiny human sound in the oppressive hush. She advanced slowly, each step echoing against the overhead bins. She looked nothing like the confident lead flight attendant who'd slapped a woman less than 2 hours ago. This Caroline was smaller, shadows under her eyes, her name badge seeming to weigh heavy on her chest. Harper met her halfway down the aisle. She was reading a slim briefing dossier, one she'd whipped out of her clutch the moment the seatbelt sign went off. She flipped a page, closed the folder with a soft click, then set it aside. Every tendon in Caroline's neck pulsed with something like fear. "Miss Chase," Caroline began, voice shaking despite her attempt at composure. I'd like to apologize again for my actions earlier." Her fingers clenched the back of a nearby seat. Harper held up a single finger, a gesture so calm it felt sarcastic. Caroline hesitated, as if waiting for Harper to tear her apart, but Harper didn't raise her voice. She didn't raise her eyes dramatically. She simply tucked her dossier under her arm and said in the quietest possible tone, "I didn't have to raise my voice. You raised your hand and sealed your fate." The words floated down the aisle like smoke. They carried no venom, no flourish, but they struck Caroline in the chest like a hammer blow. She swallowed hard, her Adam's apple bobbing as if it might lodge her last breath. Harper continued, still barely above a whisper, "You chose violence. I chose this." She tapped the dossier. "These pages hold every crew member's details. By the time you realize what happened, you'll already be gone from their ranks." Caroline's mouth opened and closed, unable to form a sound. She forced out a hoarse, But I serve this airline. I've dedicated my life." Harper's eyes, as cool as polished steel, never wavered. "Serve, yes, but service is a two-way street. You didn't uphold your end. A murmur rippled through the first-class cabin. Disbelief, awe, a thrill of approval. Passengers pressed record on their phones, some whispering, "That's cold." Others whispering, "That's justice." Caroline's knees buckled subtly. Leah Bennett, pressed against the galley bulkhead, reached out to steady her. Caroline gave a small shake of her head. No help, no mercy. She squared her shoulders again and asked in a strangled whisper, "What? What happens now?" Harper folded her hands. She regarded Caroline for a long moment, measuring her. Then she spoke as though stating the weather. "You and your crew step off that plane hand in hand with your dignity, or what's left of it. You will collect your final pay, sign your release, and never darken Skyreach's corridors again." A few passengers gasped. One man, seated nearest the galley, applauded quietly, as though honoring a performance. Another woman dabbed her eyes with a napkin, nodding in solemn approval. Caroline's breath caught. She looked down the aisle to the stern of the plane, where uniformed ground security officers stood at attention. Their expressions were impassive, professional. They had orders. Harper glanced over to them. "They'll escort you off. No theatrics, no resistance." Caroline's throat tightened. She swallowed the lump that had formed there, nodded, and stepped back toward the galley. Each footfall felt weighted. She was walking across quicksand. Harper straightened, smoothing the lapel of her blazer. She reached into her clutch again and withdrew her boarding pass. She examined it as though it were evidence, because, for Caroline and her crew, it was. With deliberate slowness, she tucked it into her inner pocket. She gave Caroline one last look, neither triumphant nor scornful, but resolute. Then Harper turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the carpeted aisle. The dossier was under her arm, her phone already in hand, ready to confirm the final sign-offs. She passed passengers who rose respectfully, murmuring thanks or nodding in solidarity. Not a single one met Caroline's eye. When Harper reached the galley's threshold, she paused, cast her gaze back down the aisle, and spoke softly. So softly that only the nearest few passengers heard. "Power unfettered by anger is the most dangerous kind." Then she was gone behind the curtain. The galley door slid shut. Caroline stood alone in the aisle, chest heaving, as Leah touched her elbow. "It's done," Leah whispered. Caroline closed her eyes, exhaled, and gave a small nod. "Yes," she said, "it's done." From behind the curtain, the soft murmur of instructions being given, clipboards opening, and footsteps on the cabin floor signaled the end of the world Caroline had known. The flight crew she'd led now stepped off one by one, heads bowed, hands raised in silent compliance, while the rest of the cabin watched, some in awe, some with pity, all changed forever by a woman who spoke so quietly she could have been ignored, if not for the power she wielded in that stillness. The jet bridge's interior lights cast a stark glow through the cabin windows of Flight 7X-143 as ground personnel prepared to board. Caroline Linton stood at the front, clipboard in hand, heart pounding in her throat. Behind her, the rest of the crew, pilots, flight attendants, even the purser, clustered in the galley, eyes downcast. In just a few moments they would step off this plane, not as professionals concluding another shift, but as pariahs ejected by an unseen power. Harper Chase remained seated in 1A, watching the scene unfold with composed detachment. She adjusted her blazer and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Each click of Caroline's heels on the carpet was amplified in the hush, and every dozen paces marked another irreversible moment in the flight crew's downfall. Caroline took a deep breath. She raised her eyes to Harper for a final, silent apology, one that needed no words. But Harper simply inclined her head once, crisply, before turning her attention back to her phone. The message on Caroline's tablet still glowed red. Crew suspension order, Flight 7X143. Terminate service upon landing. At the front galley doorway, 2 uniformed security officers stood guard, clipboards in hand. Their faces were impassive, professional, but their posture left no doubt. They had orders, and those orders were absolute. Caroline squared her shoulders, beckoned her crew forward. With her voice quavering, she managed to say, "It's time." One by one, the crew emerged from the galley. The cabin lights brightened as the galley curtain slid back. First came the purser, her neat bun slightly askew, mask of professionalism cracked by visible tension. Next, the co-pilots, usually ensconced in the cockpit's sterile confines, stepped into first class, their crisp white shirts replaced by expressions of shock and disbelief. Passengers shifted in their seats, phones lifting to capture the moment. Some looked on in stunned silence, others exchanged sympathetic glances. A few offered hesitant applause, unsure whether to cheer or console. The atmosphere was electric, equal parts morbid fascination and vindication. After all, this was the fallout of a single slap. No matter that Carolyn would have used a less extreme measure if she'd known who she was slapping. Row by row, the remaining flight attendants filed out, each maintaining the rigid posture trained into them. Leah Bennett lingered near the galley, tears glinting in her eyes, but Caroline gently guided her forward. Leah's uniform was pristine, her name badge gleaming, yet it meant nothing now. In the world of Skyreach Airlines, badges could be revoked with a press of a silent button. At the aisle's end, the ground handlers waited. They offered no help, no hand clasp, only the authority of law and corporate decree. One handler checked his tablet, tapped in a code, then glanced at Caroline's face. "Ma'am, step off here," he said softly. His voice was void of judgment, merely procedural. And that was almost worse. Caroline stepped aside to let Leah pass. Leah's footwear, polished leather heels, tapped in a hesitant rhythm. She paused at the threshold, looked back once, mouth trembling. A passenger in row 4, a retired school teacher on her way to visit grandchildren, stood and offered Leah her seat. Leah managed a small, broken smile. "Thank you," she whispered. The retired teacher shook her head. "You don't deserve this," she said. Leah's shoulders sank as she continued onward, disappearing from view. Behind Leah, the next attendant followed. Her name was Marisol. She offered a soft nod to a businessman who'd witnessed the slap. "I'm sorry for any discomfort," Marisol mouthed, voice caught in her throat. The businessman simply nodded, his eyes damp. He pressed a gentle pat on her elbow before stepping aside, leaving her to walk into uncertainty. Caroline felt each step from her crew like a blow, but she could not speak. She could not stop them. The security officers parted slightly, guiding each crew member off the plane to be processed, documented, and ultimately dismissed from their careers. A hush settled again as the last attendant left. The aisle felt cavernous, a corridor that had once symbolized service and hospitality, now empty and foreboding. Even the soft hum of the environmental control system seemed distant, swallowed by the weight of what had transpired. Then the cockpit door opened. Captain Jonathan Reynolds stepped into first class, his captain's wings gleaming on his chest. He paused at seat 1A, giving Harper a brief, respectful nod before approaching Caroline. "Ma'am," he said quietly. His voice, though calm, carried the gravity of the moment. "The crew has been escorted off as ordered." Caroline closed her eyes, a single breath escaping. When she opened them, her gaze returned to the captain. "Thank you, Captain," she whispered. The words tasted bitter. Behind him, the tunnel to the terminal beckoned, the threshold between their old lives and a future none could yet see. Passengers began to stand, stretching limbs that had grown stiff in the freeze-frame moment. They gathered their belongings and slowly made their way to the exits, stepping over the threshold that Caroline and her colleagues had just traversed. Some offered sympathetic nods to Caroline. Others simply looked away. Harper rose from her seat, picking up her lightweight tote. She moved deliberately, walking past empty service carts and unclaimed refreshments. She paused at the door where Caroline had stood moments before and placed a single, silent kiss to the top of her hand. Half a bow, half a benediction. As Harper stepped onto the jet bridge, the terminal lights glinted on her hair and blazer. Journalists, alerted by PR, milled near the glass doors, phones poised. Security officers stood at attention, guiding her through a gauntlet of camera flashes and murmured questions. Behind her, the cabin doors sealed with a soft hiss, sealing away the scene of the crew's humiliating exit. Flight 7X-143 sat empty of its staff, an aircraft momentarily frozen in aftermath. For each crew member who had walked that aisle of shame, the world beyond the jet bridge would be a reckoning of resumes, final paychecks, and silent reckonings about what respect really meant. But that was not Harper's concern. Her responsibility lay in reminding everyone, passenger and professional alike, that true power needed no volume to demand obedience, and that sometimes the quietest call could be the loudest verdict of all. In the hours following Flight 7X-143's dramatic landing and crew suspension, newsrooms around the globe lit up like Times Square billboards. Somewhere between airport taxiways and corporate boardrooms, a single silent directive had ignited a wildfire of headlines, tweets, and breaking alerts faster than any crisis PR team could spin. By mid-afternoon Eastern Time, CNN's ticker ran, "Skyreach Airlines grounded. CEO Harper Chase pulls. Insurance coverage grounds entire flight." On the network's live segment, an aviation analyst leaned into the camera. "We've never seen anything like this," she said, adjusting her earpiece. "A private individual, albeit a powerful executive, pulled the plug on insurance coverage for a major carrier while the plane was in the air. Skyreach faces potential liabilities exceeding $1,200,000,000, 0 cents, if flights are delayed or canceled in large numbers." Behind her, a graphic flickered. Skyreach stock V8.6. Simultaneously, Twitter exploded. Harper Chase trended worldwide, alongside Flight Karma and Skyreach grounded. A viral clip of passengers applauding as the crew exited lit up feeds. If only all CEOs acted with such silent authority. Respect goes both ways. Flight Karma? Imagine being slapped and then fired via a call. Power move or too far? Harper Chase? On Bloomberg, 2 panels of experts debated the fallout. One side warned that Skyreach's dependence on a single reinsurer, Clarion Holdings, was a systemic risk. The other argued Harper's decisive actions sent a clear message: company culture matters. If your employees don't treat customers with dignity, they pay the price. A lower third graphic displayed Clarion Holdings, market cap $18.00. Meanwhile, the Federal Aviation Administration released a brief statement. FAA is assessing the legal implications of in-flight crew suspensions. Passengers' rights and safety remain paramount. At Skyreach's New York headquarters, the trading floor was in chaos. Traders stared at rolling tickers. SKR down 8.6%, then 12.4%, before stabilizing around 10%. This isn't just a PR disaster. Flights are canceled, crew can't work, liabilities skyrocketing. We're looking at a multi-billion-dollar hit. Phones rang off the hooks as institutional investors demanded explanations from management. In Greenwich, Harper Chase monitored the storm from her private office. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over manicured lawns and the Housatonic River. Her assistant hovered nearby, sending rapid updates. A live feed on her secure monitor showed a montage, footage of Caroline's first-class slap, the stunned applause, the crew's humiliating exit, and now breaking news banners plastered across every financial network. Harper's face remained calm, unreadable. To her, this was the culmination of months of risk modeling, boardroom discussions, and meticulous protocol design. Her phone buzzed. A message from Clarion's CEO. Immediate shareholder call at 3:00 p.m. ET. Prepare summary of actions and anticipated exposure. Harper tapped a few keys. Confirmed, she replied. Then she turned her chair slightly, hands folded. She did not rush to celebrate. There was no gloating in her expression. Only a measured satisfaction that a contract breach clause had done its job without a public meltdown. Back down on the tarmac, passengers disembarked from Flight 7X143 into a flurry of camera flashes. Journalists jostled in the jet bridge, shouting questions into smartphones. "Ms. Chase, what prompted? Do you regret your decision? Will you reinstate the crew?" Harper exited through a side door, escorted by hushed security. A single, crisp statement was relayed through her spokesperson. Mrs. Chase's actions were in accordance with the insurance policy terms. Skyreach's compliance and passenger safety remain our top priorities. Further out in the world, YouTube channels and TikTok influencers weighed in. One popular travel vlogger summarized, "Slap heard round the world. One quiet call grounded an airline." That's one way to fix customer service. Captions scrolled, "Learn from this. Never underestimate silent power." As evening approached, the narrative threads converged on financial news sites. A headline on the Wall Street Journal's front page read, "Harper Chase and the Case for Decorum, when silence speaks louder than policy." The article analyzed Clarion's historical risk metrics, Skyreach's dependency ratios, and the delicate balance of corporate governance. Meanwhile, Skyreach's executive team convened an emergency video conference. CEO Marcus Devereaux, distinct from Harper, paced his office. "We need to navigate this," he told his leadership. "Our liability for canceled flights, crew payouts, and reputational damage is projected at over $2,300,000,000, 0 cents. We must seek reinsurance elsewhere, and fast." Counsel chimed in. "Regulators will investigate. We need a public remediation plan." In a small cafe in Greenwich, Harper's neighbors spotted her on a live feed. "There she is," he whispered to his wife. "That's the woman who did it." His wife nodded. "Makes you wonder," she said quietly, "whose hand is really pulling the strings?" As night fell, social media chatter shifted from shock to reflection. Editorials popped up, some praising Harper's use of contractual authority, others decrying the merciless fallout for 50-odd crew members. Yet across the spectrum, one theme united everyone: the power of a single silent call. In her office, Harper leaned back and reviewed the day's data. Stock charts, tweet volumes, flight cancellation numbers. None of it surprised her. It was all built into her models. She reached for her phone again, tapped out a brief note to the board. Clear deck executed flawlessly, awaiting further directives. She set the phone down, closed her laptop, and allowed herself a deep breath. Outside, the last rays of sun glinted off the river. Inside, she sat in stillness, the epicenter of a global storm she had engineered with the quietest of commands. And somewhere in New York, Caroline Linton, watching the news on a cheap apartment TV, swallowed hard. The colleague who had slapped Harper had become the symbol of every human misstep in the service industry, punished publicly and permanently. A single call had done more than any disciplinary hearing ever could. As the world processed the spectacle, One truth crystallized. In the realm of power, it isn't the loud ones you remember. It's the quiet ones who carry the ultimate authority. The next morning, the glittering glass tower of Clarion Holdings in Manhattan was already humming with activity. Journalists, analysts, and high-net-worth investors milled through the lobby, clutching coffee and tablets. Banners outside the auditorium door read, Clarion Holdings Q3 Investor Summit. Inside, the lights dimmed and a hush fell. Harper Chase took the stage in a tailored charcoal pantsuit. Her hair was swept back into a sleek knot, and she wore a pair of understated silver earrings, the sort of detail a CEO chose to reveal precision without ostentation. She paused at the podium, surveyed the crowd, and allowed a moment of silence before speaking. "Good morning," she began, voice calm and measured, each word drifting over the audience like silk. "Thank you for joining us today." Applause followed, polite and punctuated, as cameras from Bloomberg and the Financial Times recorded her entrance. Analysts clicked pens, and reporters adjusted microphones, ready to capture her every syllable. A moderator stepped to the side and introduced the first question. "Ms. Chase, can you address yesterday's events on Flight 7X143? What prompted you to activate the Clear Deck protocol?" Harper drew in a slow breath. She set her hands lightly on the podium, framed by the Clarion logo behind her. She didn't glance at notes. Instead, she looked directly into the sea of faces. "If you let small minds lead big systems," she said, her tone even, almost conversational, "you deserve small outcomes." There was a beat of startled silence, then a ripple of nods. Some audience members exchanged glances. A handful of smartphones lifted to record. One analyst leaned forward. "By small minds, are you referring to a lack of respect in customer service, or something broader?" Harper's faint half-smile widened, though her voice remained as composed as ever. "Both. In any organization, be it a boardroom or a first-class cabin, respect is non-negotiable. You cannot claim to manage risk if you refuse to manage dignity." Another reporter raised her hand. "Does Clarion plan to reinstate the suspended crew, or was this suspension permanent?" Harper's expression didn't flicker. Clarion's role is to underwrite and incentivize responsible behavior. The suspension was carried out per policy terms. Any reinstatement requests will be evaluated under existing guidelines. There was a low murmur as note-takers scribbled. The audience knew evacuated under existing guidelines was a firm but polite dismissal of sympathy. A third question came from a well-known business magazine. "Some say your action was ruthless. Critics argue it hurt passengers and staff who had nothing to do with the initial incident. How do you respond?" Harper closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, steadying herself. Then she opened them and said, "True leadership demands difficult choices. It isn't about avoiding discomfort. It's about ensuring integrity. If collateral fallout is the price of upholding standards, then so be it." Light applause followed. It wasn't enthusiastic, but it was genuine. These were investors who understood tough calls and the language of risk. After 15 minutes, Harper concluded the Q&A. She thanked her audience, stepped away from the podium, and allowed the next speaker to take the stage. Cameras swiveled to the exit as she walked off. Unhurried, unfazed, unbowed. Meanwhile, across the city in a modest Brooklyn apartment, Caroline Linton sat in front of her small television, watching the live broadcast in stunned silence. The small minds line repeated on every ticker. Harper's one-liner, "Small minds, small outcomes." Caroline's eyes filled. She reached out and switched off the set. The apartment was quiet again, save for the faint hum of her refrigerator. She pressed her palms to her face, as if trying to erase the weight of what had happened. In that moment, Caroline realized the depth of her miscalculation. She had thought the slap was an isolated incident, an embarrassing lapse in judgment. She hadn't grasped the scale of the system she'd violated, and it wasn't just a policy breach, it was a challenge to her very understanding of service and respect. She rose, walked to the mirror and stared at her reflection, the uniform hanging in her closet, crisp but empty without her. The badge she'd earned now felt like a scar. For the first time in her career, she understood that real authority wasn't about rank, seniority, or training. It was about whether you carried the humanity to wield power wisely. As the city roared beyond her window, Caroline made a silent vow. If she ever found a way back, either in aviation or elsewhere, she would never mistake noise for authority again. She would remember Harper's words, "Small minds lead to small outcomes," and she would strive for something larger. A week later, Caroline Linton stepped through the modest glass doors of Sky Reach's Training and Development Center. Gone was her crisp uniform. Today she wore a simple blouse and slacks, her name tag replaced by a generic visitor badge pinned at chest height. She paused in the lobby for a moment, took a steadying breath, and reminded herself of the vow she'd made, never again to mistake volume for authority. The reception area was bright and neutral, pale blues, soft grays, and potted greenery that lent a breath of calm to the corporate setting. A banner by the door read, "Welcome to Sky Reach, Respect and Leadership Workshop." Chairs were arranged in a semicircle, each with a neatly stacked packet on the seat. Module 1, Empathy and Service. Module 2, Unconscious Bias. Module 3, Constructive Communication. Caroline's pulse quickened as she took her seat in the back row, finger tracing the Ray's silver logo on the cover. Moments later, a facilitator, a warm-faced woman in her 50s named Marjorie, entered. She introduced herself with a genuine smile and asked participants to share their names and roles. When it was Caroline's turn, she simply said, "I was lead flight attendant," her voice steady. A hush fell over the room. The colleagues around her exchanged sympathetic glances instead of judgmental stares. The first exercise asked everyone to recall a moment they felt disrespected. Caroline's mind rang back to the boarding gate, the snap of the cane hitting the tile, the sting of being slapped. She wanted to speak, but Marjorie moved on. Instead, Caroline listened as others shared. A luggage handler ignored, an elderly passenger talked over, a child shushed when thirsty. Each story carried its own hurt, its own moment of being othered. When the facilitator invited Caroline to write down her own experience, Caroline's pen hovered. She remembered the tense cabin, the crowd's silent judgment, the quiet command that ruined careers. On the paper she wrote simply, "I was wrong. I acted with arrogance, injuring dignity." She folded the page and placed it in the reflection box with the others. Next, Marjorie guided a role play. The one participant played a disgruntled passenger, the other a flight attendant. Caroline volunteered to observe. From her seat, she watched them stumble, grasp for empathy, or lash out defensively. She realized how little training had prepared her for actual human reactions. Not every complaint was a rule to enforce. Sometimes it was a person asking to be seen. After a short break, the group moved to unconscious bias. Caroline's heart pounded as she encountered statements like, "I assume first-class passengers dress a certain way." She admitted aloud, "I looked at someone and judged their worth by their appearance." The room was silent, but not cold. Heads nodded in understanding. She wasn't alone in this blind spot. By the end of the session, participants were paired to draft respect action plans. Caroline's plan was direct. Read each passenger by name, no assumptions. Pause before enforcing rules, ask clarifying questions. Report bias incidents, hers and others, to mentor. She wrote slowly, imprinting each step so that it would stick. When Marjorie collected the plans, she offered Caroline a small, encouraging nod, as if seeing genuine resolve. Leaving the center, Caroline felt different. She wasn't the proud lead attendant without a flaw. She wasn't the pariah punished by a silent phone call. She was someone with a chance to rebuild, to show that respect could be more than policy, could be a practice rooted in empathy. Stepping out into the afternoon sun, Caroline breathed deeply and squared her shoulders. The runway to redemption was long, but for the first time, she was ready for the journey. Harper Chase stepped off the jet bridge into the terminal's cool glare, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She moved with that same quiet confidence that had rippled through every moment of Flight 7X143's saga. Passengers and onlookers parted before her, not out of fear, but out of newfound respect. Their eyes followed her, curious, maybe a little in awe. A small child tugged at her mother's sleeve and pointed. Harper offered the girl a gentle nod and a soft smile. It was a simple gesture, but it carried more weight than any announcement. The mother whispered, "Thank you," and Harper nodded again, before slipping through the sliding doors. Behind her, the terminal hummed back to life. News crews packed up cables. Passengers resumed their paths toward baggage claim or their connecting gates. But the story lingered. The woman who turned a slap into a global reckoning without ever raising her voice. Caroline Linton, now a trainee in the Respect Workshop rather than lead attendant, watched a clip of Harper's exit on her tablet. She paused the video on that final nod toward the little girl. In that quiet exchange, Caroline saw the true essence of Harper's power, authority tempered by humanity. At a nearby cafe, business travelers huddled over laptops, scrolling through articles headlined with Harper's one-liner. Respect isn't granted by title, it's proven in silence. One executive closed his laptop, folded his arms and said, "That's a lesson we all need." Over in the airport lounge, a group of flight attendants compared notes on their training plans, inspired to follow Caroline's new Respect Action Plan. They spoke in hushed tones. Learn names. Pause before judgment. Own mistakes. The seed of change had been planted. Harper reached her car, a sleek, unbranded black sedan. She paused at the curb, took one last look at the terminal's facade, and allowed herself the smallest breath of satisfaction. It wasn't triumph she felt. It was clarity. That dignity and respect outlast any policy, any protocol. She slid into the back seat, door closing with a soft click. As the car pulled away, the terminal's automatic doors glided shut behind her, sealing the chapter on a flight no one would ever forget. And in that sealed moment, the world understood. True power speaks softly, and its echo endures.